I wish I remembered my grandfather more. He was a big character, but I'm not sure if that's based on what I've been told or if that's what I remember. But my father similarly is a big character, and I grew up with him regularly entertaining bigwigs from within the Scotch whisky industry, and I'd regularly, as a very little girl, listening to conversations about this magical industry that I heard of. My parents would have dinner parties and drink stews, and there would be a lot of key people from within the Scotch whisky industry, and it always sounded intriguing. I didn't necessarily want to go into it, but I was always intrigued by what I heard and the sort of people that worked within the industry. I'd say there were two moments where I felt Scotch whisky had suddenly become part of me and my life. One was certainly when I first joined White Mackay, and Richard Patterson took me under his wing and spent some time with me in his lab sample room, and really wanted to teach me about Scotch whisky, and spent a lot of time tasting whisky with me. And not to be outdone, my dad did the same at home. He and Richard, or Dickie as he knows him as, go way back. And I think Fred thought, well, if he's teaching her about the White Mackay whiskies, I'll teach her about the Douglas Laing whiskies. So I got the best of both worlds, because obviously our lineup's quite different, and Fred spent a lot of time bringing me on with regards single casks and blended malts and the like. So that was a turning point where I definitely felt a lot more confident and knowledgeable about whisky. Entirely the wrong thing for me to have done would have be to go from university straight into Douglas Laing. It was never my plan, actually, anyway, to join the family business. It was quite the opposite, if I'm being truthful. So I'm incredibly thankful for the time that I had at both White Mackay and indeed Beam Suntory, Morrison Bowmore. I loved both stints in both companies and learned a huge amount. My dad would say it was great because I made mistakes at the expense of other companies, but I also got a taste of how the bigger boys do it, and would like to think, and I think Fred would agree, that it allowed me to bring a bit more professionalism to Douglas Laing, and I absolutely adored the brands that I worked on, primarily being Jura and Bowmore. They will forever be favourites for me. So I'm so thankful that I had my time there with those companies. I think it remains a really traditional industry, and I kind of view that as a positive. I realise it can be seen as a negative, and that we're maybe not forward-looking enough, but actually the traditional aspect is so important. I don't play golf, but oddly, I quite like that deals are still done on a golf course. That was the way it was back in my grandfather's day, and it still is today. That said, I think there is a fresher, newer approach coming through when it comes to new product development, and there's certainly new techniques. I guess quality is such a personal thing. For me, I love every time I get samples across my desk, and I actually really enjoy when they're blind samples, and sometimes they come over to our head office from our bottling facility and they're not labelled up. And I find that oddly fascinating, because I then get the chance to nose them, taste them, try and suss out what I'm tasting. But ultimately, for me, it boils down to how good does it taste. I am not a chemist. I've got huge admiration for the proper whiskey blenders, but for me, it just comes down to, do I genuinely think this is a quality Scotch whisky that stands up on its own 2 feet, and I'm prepared to put my name to it? I I feel really proud to have hit the 20-year mark. That it's a tough industry just now, so to have withstood 2 decades is quite an achievement for me. But beyond that, I would probably go back to 2013 when I first joined Douglas Laing, and I worked very closely with my dad, our chairman, Fred, to develop our Scallywag Speyside Malt Scotch Whisky and also Old Particular, our single cask core range. They were 2 new products at the time, and within a relatively short period of time, my dad and I developed them from start to finish, everything from blending Scallywag through to selecting the first casks for Old Particular, the packaging development with the designers through to writing the copy. It was a real end-to-end process, and I still get a real buzz when I am travelling the world and I see Scallywag behind a bar or Old Particular on a retailer's shelf. It gives me a real excitement and enthusiasm for what I do. For me, it's a great lineup of Scotch whisky. You could go nuts because I genuinely believe there's a Scotch whisky for everyone. But in my mind, this is a great variety of Highland and indeed Island through to Speyside, the biggest region, through to grain, which I'm a huge fan of because of my sweet tooth. And then it concludes with an absolute sherry bomb. And I do believe there's always a place for a sherry bomb. So for me, limiting it to only 4, this brings a great array and a great representation of what Scotch whisky offers. I would say it has been a journey, and like any journey, there have been bumps along the way, and there have been, but it's been a lot of fun. I love what I do, and ultimately the word lucky always springs to mind because how lucky am I? I get to work with these great whiskies day in, day out, and no 2 days are ever the same in Douglas Laing.